The camera light flickered on. The moderator adjusted her mic. In the heart of Washington, D.C., inside a glass-walled boardroom perched above a sea of government buildings, something unexpected was about to unfold. Officially, the event was a policy roundtable, a civil discussion, nothing more. But those who knew Washington politics understood nothing in this city was ever truly civil. The room was filled with power. You could see it in the sharp suits, the silver hair, the expensive watches. Journalists from CNN, MSNBC, and even Al Jazeera were scattered in the back, checking their notes and readying for the broadcast. Staffers whispered into earpieces. A digital timer on the far wall counted down to 0. At the center table sat Linda McMahon, former WWE executive, former Trump cabinet official, and now a political heavyweight in conservative fundraising. She wore a navy suit, her blonde hair in a flawless bob, and a cold smile that seemed carefully rehearsed. She was announced as the keynote speaker, something that hadn't been mentioned in the initial press release. Across from her, quietly seated, was Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett. Dressed in white, eyes calm but alert, she didn't flinch when Linda's name was announced. She wasn't surprised, just disappointed. No one had told her this would be a two-woman showdown. No one said anything about a debate. The moderator opened the session with polite welcomes, then turned to McMahon for opening thoughts. Linda leaned forward and, in a tone dripping with charm and subtle disdain, began. Today's political climate, she said, is filled with noise. There's a big difference between building real policy and riding culture waves. I've built businesses. I sat at real tables with real men who built things. We need serious leadership, not catchphrases, not hashtags. It landed with a heavy thud. Crockett gave a small smile, tight, unreadable. She didn't interrupt. The cameras zoomed in. Linda continued. I respect anyone who steps into public service, she said, though her tone suggested the opposite. But we must be honest. Not everyone is qualified just because they have followers. Activists make noise, leaders make change. Sever. And the audience shifted in their chairs. A few young attendees exchanged glances. One aide lowered their tablets slowly. The air felt like it was tightening. Jasmine said nothing. She sat perfectly still. Her silence wasn't weakness. It was strategy. Linda smiled wider, sensing the attention on her. You can't legislate leadership with tweets, she said. We have to start distinguishing between firebrands and professionals. There it was. The insult hung in the air like smoke. Everyone knew who that was aimed at. Everyone. The cameras caught it. The audio was crisp. It was live. The room fell into silence. Real silence. No shuffling, no murmurs, just breath held tight. Crockett finally moved just slightly. She tilted her head and rested her hands on the table. Her expression didn't change, but her eyes were sharp now, watching, calculating, waiting. The moderator looked nervous. One of the producers in the back made a slicing motion across their neck, trying to cut the feed. But it was too late. The footage was already rolling on 3 major networks. What had started as a policy discussion was now something else entirely. This wasn't politics anymore. This was personal. And the woman in white wasn't finished. The silence in the room felt like a weight pressing on every chest. For a moment, no one moved. No one blinked. All eyes were on Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett. She leaned forward, calm as ever. Her voice, when it came, was soft. Too soft. But every microphone picked it up. I appreciate the reminder, she said slowly, that real leadership isn't about tweets. It's about truth. Linda McMahon's smile faltered. Crockett didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her words carried something heavier than anger, facts, pain, and purpose. You mentioned negotiating with real men, she continued. I've negotiated with real men too. But mine weren't sitting at country clubs. They were sitting in jail cells. Think they were sitting in courtrooms. Most of them didn't have lawyers. It was the only voice they had. A few murmurs rippled across the room. The journalists leaned forward. The tension had turned. Crockett had taken control. "I didn't ride a wave," she said. "I stood in the flood." Then came the pivot, the moment that turned the tables. Completely. She pulled out a small folder, placed it on the table, and tapped it once. "This is a copy of your lobbying firm's 2019 strategy memo," she said, eyes locked on Linda. "It outlines how to counter progressive narratives. In minority districts using targeted media buys and cultural influencers, you weren't building bridges, Ms. McMahon. You were buying them and burning the rest." Gasps, audible this time. Linda shifted in her seat, but didn't speak. Crockett continued, still calm. "Your version of leadership left real families without health care. It propped up tax loopholes for corporations that paid zero in federal taxes. It told women like me that our place is only respectable if we don't make noise." She paused, just long enough for the silence to bite again. "But I'm not here for your respect," Crockett said. "I'm here to change what power looks like. And sometimes that means being a firebrand, because fires clear dead roots." The moderator tried to regain control. "Ladies, let's keep it." "No," Crockett said, her voice still even. "Let's keep it honest." For the first time since the event began, Linda looked unsure. Her posture tightened. Her hands fidgeted under the table. Crockett then turned to the audience. Not just those in the room, but those watching across the country. "This isn't about me versus her," she said. "This is about a system that still believes silence is professionalism, and truth is." Too loud, the broadcast was still live. On Twitter, Crockett's name was already trending. Clips were going viral within minutes. One showed her calmly sliding the folder forward. Another captured her saying, "Fires clear dead roots." Journalists began whispering the word historic. Backstage, political aides were scrambling. Phones buzzed. Campaign advisors were updating memos in real time. And Linda, she sat frozen. Whatever strategy she'd entered the room with had collapsed. The confrontation was never supposed to go this far. She'd expected a quick win, a passive opponent, a camera-friendly moment to strengthen her standing. But Jasmine Crockett wasn't playing by old rules. The moderator finally called for a break. The feed cut to commercial. But the damage, or perhaps the justice, was already done. As Crockett stood to stretch, someone close to the production caught a brief look in Linda's eyes. It wasn't just anger, it was fear. And the silence in that room didn't belong to Crockett anymore. It belonged to Linda. The commercial break was supposed to last 90 seconds, stretched to 6 minutes. Behind the scenes, chaos unfolded. Producers barked into headsets. Interns rushed across the studio floor, trying to stay out of frame. One senior staffer whispered urgently on the phone, "We need to run PR control now. This is not the panel we promised sponsors." In the green room, a communications advisor for Linda McMahon paced with panic in her eyes. "Why didn't she stick to the economic messaging?" she hissed. "Why go personal?" But no one answered. No one could. On the other side of the room, Jasmine Crockett sat alone, calmly sipping water. Her staff didn't hover. She didn't need them to. The damage was already done. She hadn't even used half the material in her folder. Outside the building, media vans began to gather. A group of college students nearby had already started live streaming reactions. Hashtag Crockett Clash had overtaken Twitter within minutes. Analysts, celebrities, even former diplomats were weighing in. One post simply said, "This wasn't a debate, it was a reckoning." The feed returned to air with a wide shot of the boardroom. The moderator's smile was forced now, her tone unusually stiff. "And we're back." Thank you for joining us for this important discussion on policy and leadership in modern America. Linda McMahon was visibly shaken. Her hands once resting calmly on the table, now clenched just out of frame. The confident, polished figure from earlier had cracks in her image. She opened her mouth to speak, but Crockett interrupted gently, respectfully, but with full control. "There's one more thing I'd like to clarify," she said. The moderator hesitated, then nodded. Crockett turned slightly in her chair, her voice steady. "You said earlier that real leaders don't hide behind catchphrases, that we don't legislate on hashtags. But I'd argue that real leaders don't hide behind boardrooms either." She reached down and pulled out a second document. "This," she said, "is a copy of the 2017 internal memo from the McMahon Foundation. In it, you advised your advisory board to limit donations to inner-city education programs unless they produced optics. That aligned with conservative media messaging." Linda flinched. Crockett didn't blink. "You weren't investing in education. You were buying cover." Journalists in the back began typing furiously. The moderator leaned forward as if trying to stop what was coming next, but Crockett kept going. "And while we're being honest," she added, "the same year you were praising tax reform on national TV, one of your companies moved manufacturing offshore. That's not just hypocrisy. That's strategy." Linda finally snapped. "This is a political ambush," she said, her voice rising. "This isn't leadership, it's theater." Crockett's reply was quiet. "No, this is exposure. And if it feels like theater, maybe that's because for too long. Some of us have only been allowed to speak when it's scripted." Gasps. Again, from the studio, from viewers at home. From the control room, where one producer whispered, "We're witnessing a collapse." Suddenly, a new ripple hit. A journalist from Reuters stood up and asked a question off script. "Congresswoman Crockett, are you suggesting that Ms. McMahon's business dealings should be investigated by the House Ethics Committee?" Jasmine didn't answer right away. She turned to Linda, then back to the camera. "I'm suggesting that when people in power make rules they refuse to follow, it's not politics anymore. It's fraud." The room fell silent again. But this time, the silence didn't feel like tension. It felt like truth landing. Somewhere backstage, a White House staffer watching the live stream texted, "We have a problem. This is going to blow wide open." Outside, crowds began forming with signs and cell phones. Crockett supporters were gathering, chanting lines she had delivered just minutes earlier. "Truth isn't too loud. Fires clear dead roots." Linda stood. She tried to hold her composure. Her voice broke slightly. "I didn't come here for this circus." Crockett looked up at her and said, "You didn't come here expecting resistance. That was it." Linda McMahon turned and walked out. Live on camera. No goodbye. No rebuttal. Just the sound of her heels echoing across the polished floor and a stunned audience watching history unfold. Crockett stayed seated, composed, powerful. The moderator closed the segment with trembling hands and a hoarse voice. "Thank you for joining us." The feed went dark. But the story had just begun. The clip of Linda McMahon walking off set played on every major network within the hour. Cable news anchors stumbled over their scripts, scrambling to rewrite coverage that had been prepared days in advance. This wasn't supposed to be breaking news. It was supposed to be a panel, a conversation, maybe a few talking points exchanged. But what had happened live on air now looked more like a political earthquake. By midnight, the video had been viewed over 22 million times across social platforms. Hashtags like #Crockett Confrontation, #McMahon Meltdown, and #Leadership Exposed dominated every trending list from New York to Nairobi. At 1:12 a.m., Politico broke the first follow-up story. The leaked documents Jasmine Crockett had referenced on air were real. Verified, a senior member of McMahon's foundation confirmed their authenticity off the record, saying, "We never thought they'd see the light of day." Inside McMahon's inner circle, panic took over. Legal advisors were brought in. Private PR firm was hired within hours to spin the narrative. But the damage was already alive in the bloodstream of public opinion. Attempts to label Crockett's performance as disrespectful only fueled the fire, especially among women, civil rights advocates, and younger voters. Meanwhile, Crockett kept silent. Her office issued no formal statement, no press conference, no media tour, just one post on her social media account. "I didn't come to destroy, I came to disclose." That one sentence was retweeted over 500,000 times in a single day. The next morning, the Senate Committee on Business Oversight issued a formal request for clarification regarding McMahon's offshore manufacturing shifts and lobbying practices. It wasn't a criminal probe, not yet. But the word investigation now floated in the air around McMahon's name like a permanent cloud. At the same time, journalists began digging deeper into Jasmine Crockett's past, not to attack her, but to understand how a first-term congresswoman from Texas had just taken down a political titan on national television. What they found only added fuel to her rising legend. Crockett's background as a civil rights attorney, her long record of fighting wrongful convictions, and her unshakable loyalty to underserved communities painted the picture of a leader forged in fire. She hadn't arrived on the national stage overnight. She had crawled there, case by case, courtroom by courtroom. In a podcast interview recorded 2 years earlier, Crockett had said, "The law doesn't scare me. The system doesn't scare me. What scares me is silence." Now, those words were being replayed across media outlets like prophecy. That afternoon, an emergency meeting took place at the headquarters of a powerful political action committee tied to McMahon. Internal polling showed a 21-point drop in public favorability overnight. One strategist slammed a binder onto the table and shouted, "She's untouchable now. Crockett's untouchable. We tried to embarrass her, and she embarrassed the entire machine." It was more than embarrassment. It was exposure. Meanwhile, in Washington's inner circles, things began to shift. A small but notable group of centrist lawmakers began quietly aligning themselves with Crockett's message. They weren't ready to support her publicly, not yet. But her words had struck something real, something raw. And they couldn't ignore the way the public was responding. Foreign correspondents began reporting on the clash. One UK journalist wrote, "In an age where political theater often replaces substance, Jasmine Crockett has reminded us that clarity and courage are not mutually exclusive." A Middle Eastern news anchor opened his show by saying, "When truth becomes performance and power feels untouchable, moments like this break the illusion." That night, a major international news outlet released an in-depth segment titled, "Jasmine Crockett versus the Political Machine. When Silence Lost and Still, Crockett Remained Off Camera." She wasn't avoiding the spotlight. She simply didn't need it. The truth was already speaking loud enough. But behind closed doors, she was preparing for something bigger. Her aides were reviewing hundreds of letters and emails from whistleblowers, people who had worked in the same systems as Linda McMahon. People who were ready to talk now because one woman had dared to do it first. This wasn't about a single debate anymore. This was about who really held power and who had finally learned to fight back. The days that followed didn't calm the storm, they fed it. While Linda McMahon's legal team scrambled to control the fallout, new revelations began surfacing. One investigative journalist from The Intercept obtained internal financial documents from a McMahon-linked nonprofit. The files, buried deep in archived emails, revealed questionable payments to foreign consulting firms, one of which had been quietly flagged by the U.S. Treasury 2 years prior for operating in violation of sanctions. The story broke with the headline, "McMahon Empire Tied to Sanctioned Firm." Crockett's warning was just the beginning. By then it was clear, Jasmine Crockett hadn't just won a televised confrontation. She had pulled back the curtain on an entire network of deals donations, and decisions that had long operated in the shadows. But Crockett herself, she remained focused, grounded. She issued no victory lap, no fiery speeches. Instead, she returned to the House floor and quietly co-sponsored a bipartisan bill aimed at increasing transparency for lobbying-related nonprofits. The bill wasn't flashy, didn't make headlines, at least not yet. But insiders recognized it for what it was, a declaration of intent. She was building momentum the old-fashioned way, brick by brick. Meanwhile, the media frenzy refused to die down. Political panels dissected every angle of the live confrontation. Experts called it the most consequential on-air political exchange since the Biden-Palin debates. Clips of Crockett calmly dismantling McMahon's remarks were now being taught in media ethics courses. One professor called it a masterclass in political composure under fire. Back in McMahon's world, fractures were forming. 2 board members from her foundation resigned quietly, releasing vague statements about fundamental disagreements in leadership values. A conservative media outlet known for its loyalty to McMahon published an editorial titled, "Time to Step Back. We need a new face for conservative business advocacy." Even her former allies had begun to distance themselves. Then came the real shock. On a Thursday morning, the New York Times dropped a bombshell. One of McMahon's former aides had turned whistleblower. In a signed affidavit, the aide alleged that not only had McMahon known about the offshore manufacturing deals, Crockett exposed she had actively lobbied to keep them hidden from federal trade inspectors. The affidavit included names, emails, and even flight records to Dubai, where one of the hidden subsidiaries was headquartered. Within hours, a formal inquiry was launched by the House Committee on Oversight and Accountability. Crockett's name wasn't in the report. She didn't need it to be. She had started a chain reaction. As the pressure mounted, Linda McMahon canceled all public appearances. Rumors swirled about her possible resignation from several political boards, but no official statements came. She had vanished from the spotlight she once commanded so easily. And Jasmine Crockett. She gave one interview. Just one. It aired on Sunday evening during prime time on a major news network. No makeup team, no special lighting. Just her sitting across from a seasoned journalist, answering every question with quiet clarity. "I didn't go into that room expecting a fight," she said. "But I came prepared for one. Because sometimes power only listens when it's cornered." The journalist asked, "What gave you the courage to speak like that, knowing who you were up against?" Crockett smiled, not arrogant, not proud, just tired. "Honest, I've been up against worse than Linda McMahon," she said. "I've been up against systems that steal people's lives and call it policy. She underestimated me because I didn't come from money, because I didn't play by the script. But I know what truth sounds like. And I know how to say it so it can't be ignored." By the next day, her approval ratings had surged nationwide. Civil rights leaders called her a necessary voice in a broken time. Young activists flooded her office with messages of support. Even international leaders, some from countries where women were still fighting for basic political representations, shared the footage, calling it a moment of global clarity. But behind the scenes, Crockett was already thinking ahead. The policies, the people still suffering, the systems still untouched. She knew the spotlight wouldn't last forever, and she didn't need it to, because the real work wasn't on the stage. It was in the silence that came after, in the systems that needed rebuilding, in the voters who, for the first time in a long time, felt like someone had finally spoken for them. And not just spoken, fought. The halls of Congress were quieter than usual. Jasmine Crockett walked with purpose, her steps steady, her expression unreadable. She wore no makeup, no bright colors, just a dark navy suit and a stack of folders under her arm. Behind her, aides moved swiftly, fielding messages, reviewing documents, and forwarding press requests, all of which she ignored. She had no time. for the noise. Across town, the Oversight Committee had just voted 9-3 in favor of opening a preliminary ethics investigation into Linda McMahon's financial entanglements in action no one had imagined possible 2 weeks earlier. The committee's chair called the motion procedural, but Washington insiders knew what it really was: a signal. The shield around McMahon was cracking. What triggered it wasn't just the leaked emails or offshore accounts. It was the tone of the confrontation, how quiet, calm, and unflinching Crockett had been. She hadn't roared. She hadn't thrown insults. She had made truth feel heavier than accusation. Crockett was preparing her next move. Inside her private office, Jasmine met with a small team of investigative staffers. A map of political donors, dark money groups, and nonprofit organizations linked to McMahon's empire was spread across the table. At the center of the web, a shell corporation registered in the British Virgin Islands. One that had quietly funneled millions in and out of political campaigns over the last 7 years. Find the gaps, she said quietly. Connect them to policy. Money's changing hands. Someone's promising something in return. No one questioned her tone. They were long past that now. Meanwhile, across media outlets, a different kind of panic was taking shape. Right-wing commentators tried to rally support behind McMahon, but their talking points felt stale. This is cancel culture, one anchor said. But even their own viewers weren't convinced. Comments flooded in. This isn't canceling. This is accountability. She got caught lying and walked off TV. That's not leadership. On Capitol Hill, Jasmine's inbox filled with quiet endorsements from lawmakers who had once kept their distance. Some were Republicans, some were centrist Democrats. Many were women. They weren't ready to join her publicly, not yet, but they were watching. And more importantly, they were listening. Then came the most unexpected moment. A junior staffer knocked on her office door and handed her a sealed envelope. Inside was a handwritten note. No name, no sender. The woman you faced on that stage wasn't just protecting herself. She was protecting the system that made her rich. Keep pulling. The roots go deeper. Attached was a flash drive. Her lead counsel ran it through a secure offline system. Inside encrypted files, minutes from closed-door strategy meetings. Recordings of high-level discussions between lobbyists and policymakers, some implicating current government officials. The metadata showed the files came from inside one of McMahon's private firms. This wasn't just evidence, this was ammunition. But Crockett didn't rush to release it. She understood what it meant. Once it went public, the story would no longer be about Linda McMahon. It would be about everyone, every silent partner. Every lawmaker who looked the other way. Every billionaire who bought influence while pretending to serve. She stood at the edge of a political battlefield bigger than she had imagined. And she wasn't walking away. That night, Jasmine sat alone in her apartment. Lights dimmed, laptop open, reviewing the recordings. One voice on the tape caught her attention. A U.S. senator laughing as he discussed how to distract the public. With media-friendly bills while cutting backroom deals on trade, she leaned back in her chair, closed her eyes. The path forward was no longer just about holding Linda accountable. It was about exposing a machine. The next morning, Crockett called a closed-door strategy meeting with trusted allies policy experts. Journalists, civil rights leaders, and one former whistleblower who had come out of retirement just to advise her. She laid the flash drive. In the center of the table, "This doesn't go to cable news," she said. "It goes to the people. We build it brick by brick. A public record. A movement that doesn't rely on noise but on proof." The room was quiet. Then someone asked, "What if they try to destroy you for this?" She looked at them, eyes clear. They've already tried. That afternoon, she posted a simple message to her public account. "We were never meant to survive the system. But we're still here, and now it's our turn to investigate." The post exploded online. And somewhere in the dark corners, Of DC, those who had grown comfortable behind closed doors began to panic. Because they weren't just facing a politician now, they were facing a storm. The storm had arrived. Jasmine Crockett stood at the podium in a packed town hall auditorium in Baltimore. The room buzzed with energy activists, journalists, union leaders, students, teachers, and families all gathered in one place. Some held handwritten signs, "Power is not a privilege. Expose the machine and truth doesn't flinch." This wasn't a campaign rally. It wasn't a protest, it was a reckoning. 3 weeks had passed since Crockett's televised clash with Linda McMahon. In that time, a quiet revolution had started. One not led by slogans, but by documents, contracts, recordings, memos, and testimonies. Her team had built what they called the Ledger, a public database exposing connections between corporate lobbyists, shadow donors, and policy manipulation across multiple sectors. It wasn't hosted on a government website. It was built by volunteers, coders, veterans, civics teachers, teenagers, anyone who wanted to break the silence. McMahon's name was just the beginning. Over a dozen other names had now surfaced, current and former officials, consultants, lawmakers, media influencers. The recordings on the flash drive had been authenticated by multiple independent labs. Every upload to the Ledger was triple-sourced, verified, and traceable. And the public. They were listening now at the town hall. Crockett didn't open with a victory speech. She opened with a question. "What does it mean?" she asked. "When the people who make the rules don't follow them." The audience was silent. She continued. "It means the system isn't broken. It's working exactly as designed to protect itself. But the design has a flaw." She paused. Applause thundered. But she wasn't done. She began reading names, not to accuse, but to inform. Corporate executives who donated to education bills while profiting from private testing companies. Lawmakers who voted against healthcare subsidies while owning shares in pharmaceutical giants. Media personalities who attacked welfare programs while receiving government tax incentives. She didn't shout. She didn't perform. She revealed one layer at a time. The same night, a major news outlet aired an hour-long investigative special titled "The Ledger," when one woman pulled the thread. In it, Crockett appeared only briefly. Most of the documentary featured whistleblowers, formerly silenced voices, would come forward because they saw one woman on live television refuse to play by the rules. A former legal clerk, a factory worker, a disabled veteran, a teacher fired for refusing to falsify test results. They all said the same thing in different words. "We were afraid." But she wasn't. By week's end, the Senate Ethics Committee had expanded its inquiry to include campaign donations tied to McMahon and 4 other high-profile figures. 2 stepped down before formal hearings could begin. One released a statement blaming media distortion. The other fled the country. And Jasmine Crockett. She refused to claim the spotlight. When invited to major cable interviews, she sent junior staffers or community organizers in her place. When asked what she'd do next, she simply said, "I'll keep pulling." That frustrated some pundits. It inspired millions more. A journalist for The Guardian wrote, "She's not performing politics. She's practicing accountability. And in that act, she's changed the weather in Washington." On the last Friday of the month, the House passed a bill, the Political Transparency and Ethics Reform Act. Crockett's name was listed third on the sponsor line. It's passed with rare bipartisan support. Quiet applause filled the chamber. But outside, crowds roared, not because of a law, but because of what had led to it. One woman, one voice, one moment of calm truth against an empire of illusion. Back in her district, Crockett visited a public school that had nearly closed the year before due to funding cuts pushed by donors like McMahon. The teachers gave her a handmade banner that read, "We were never meant to survive, but we're still here." She smiled, folded it carefully, promised to hang it in her office. That night, a child asked her during a community Q&A, "Were you scared when you said all that on TV?" Crockett bent down and looked the girl in the eyes. "I was," she said, "but I said it anyway." In that moment, the room went quiet, not from fear, but from understanding. The system hadn't been defeated, but it had been exposed. And sometimes, that's the first real victory. Because silence, once broken, doesn't return quietly. It echoes forever.